This is Got Time with Christopher John, your scholar and gentleman in a hoodie. It is Black History Month. Yes, it is Black History Month, February 2025. Now, you can't celebrate or acknowledge Black History Month without knowing and understanding its legacy, who initiated, and that would be Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Now, Woodson was born in 1875, 2 years before the abandonment of Reconstruction. Now, you might ask, what is Reconstruction? Well, this is a period in U.S. history from the end of the Civil War, 1865 to 1877, where black men were given rights to vote and participate in political life, meaning to be able to run for office like mayors, senators, congressmen, and so forth. Very critical time in our history that often goes overlooked. Now, Woodson was a first-generation freeman, meaning that those in his family before him were enslaved. And it's remarkable that he would go on to earn his bachelor's degree as well as his master's degree. Now, while obtaining his doctorate at Harvard University, yes, the prestigious Harvard University, he was told by a professor that black folks don't have a history. And that fueled his passion to be an essential force for illuminating black history. He earned his PhD in 1912 and founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History in 1950, hence the hoodie that I have here, 1915. Now, the goal of this association was placing black historical contributions at the front and center of history. Today, the organization is the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. I encourage you to find their website. Go ahead, find it on the internet, and visit the website and understand the work that it continues to do to this very day to elevate and illuminate black history. Now, Woodson lobbied in schools and organizations to participate in a special program to encourage the study of black history, which began in February of 1926. You know how you have people talk about why we have to celebrate black history in the coldest, one of the shortest months of the year. Well, Carter G. Woodson aligned Negro History Week, which it would become 99 years ago, almost 99 years ago. He selected February because it aligned with the celebrations that honored who he viewed as, in many black Americans at that time, viewed as the most essential figures for black progress in this country, and that would be the birthdays of Frederick Douglass and former President Abraham Lincoln. Now, in 1976, just 49 years ago, General Ford became the first president to recognize Black History Month in a message to the public. And he encouraged Americans to, quote, seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. And this sparked a presidential tradition that has continued until now. Congress passed a law in 1986, just 39 years ago, designating that February as Black History Month. It's important to understand the full context of how we got here today in celebrating Black History Month. And when I talk about 99 years ago, 49 years ago, 39 years ago, think of someone you know that might be close to that age or around that age. We haven't really been celebrating Black History Month far that long for this country to be approaching 250 years old. Now, every year, ASALH, that's what we call it, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, presents a theme for us to focus on. And this year's theme for 2025 is African Americans and Labor. It's an opportunity for us to examine the spectrum of black labor in this country, from enslavement, the most essential historical labor force in this country, those who were enslaved on plantations, those who were enslaved on tobacco fields, cotton fields, and I will say the cotton that produced 60% of the world's cotton, picked by the hands of our ancestors and forebears to create this great economic wealth for this country. Through that to black-owned businesses. Black fortitude has always been progressive. As with Reconstruction, not only are we going to vote, but we were going to run for office too. Look at all those early black elected officials during the Reconstruction era. Now, not only are we going to be a labor force, but we're also going to be business owners. And each respective pursuit has been received as a threat to the white stream power structure. So why do I say that? Let me give an example. The People's Grocery. There's this town in Tennessee called Memphis, this city. And during this time period, Memphis was a city rife with racial tensions during the late 19th century, where economic success of African Americans was often met with hostility. At the heart of this disturbance was the People's Grocery, a thriving black-owned store that became a symbol of self-sufficiency and hope. Tragically, it also became the trigger of one of the most heinous acts of racial violence in American history. So let's unpack the People's Grocery. It opened in 1889 in a neighborhood in Memphis called The Curve. It was a cooperative venture owned by Thomas Moss and 10 other prominent black individuals. It's important for me to pause right there for you to have the understanding that although Thomas Moss was the primary owner, that it was a cooperative venture. It's important to understand that when black businesses or black leadership takes fold, that there is a body that is serving under that leadership. And so no one leads by themselves. They are always supported. And Thomas Moss is being supported by prominent other black individuals, providing a service to not only the black community, but all the communities that are there in Memphis. It was a pillar for the community, offering quality goods and competitive prices. Its success disrupted the local market, particularly affecting a man by the name of William Barrett, a white grocer whose store had previously monopolized the area. And so there was a great deal of tension and jealousy and insecurity, I would say, that Barrett would have. As the People's Grocery flourished, so did the animosity that came from not only Barrett, but other competitors. The economic rivalry was made worse by the racial bias of the time, which saw black success as a challenge to the status quo. And so on March 2nd of 1892, there was an incident where a young black boy and a young white boy, who happened to be the son of Barrett, got into a fight over a game of marbles outside of the People's Grocery. That things escalated to where Barrett ran across the street towards the store, got involved in this fight between the two young men. And the owners of the People's Grocery store also came out. Now, Barrett hit McDowell, who was one of the owners there at the grocery store, with a revolver and knocked him to the ground, dropping the gun in the process. McDowell picks up the firearm and fires a warning shot at Barrett. McDowell was arrested but released on bond on March 4th, just 2 days later. Now, tensions still continued to run high. News of the altercation spread rapidly, and the black community began to increasingly be concerned about potential attacks. And so as we've done during the Underground Railroad time, and we would go to the brush howers in the clearing to meet secretly, to organize. This community did the same. They held meetings and they were called the local black leaders there and vowed to defend their community against further aggression. And so on March 5th, 1892, Judge Julius Du Bois, a former Confederate soldier, publicly declared it's his intention to form a posse, or I would say a mob, to get rid of the neighborhood that were so-called rowdies. And so from this, there was this tension that was building between the black and white communities there. Certain incidents would take place that would escalate that. And with little hope for protection from the police, Moss, Stewart, and McDowell, those three gentlemen that were the primary owners of the People's Grocer, along with other members of the community, armed themselves in anticipation of an attack. So they exercised their Second Amendment right. We hear quite a bit about the Second Amendment, but this is a black community who are exercising their Second Amendment right. And then on March 5th, a group of armed white men, including the county sheriff and deputized citizens, approached the People's Grocery dressed in plain clothes and positioned themselves at the front and back of the store. And then they broke into the store. And the men inside of the store opened fire on these men, protecting and defending their property, protecting their community store. After the shooting incident, the local authorities quickly moved in to arrest approximately about 40 people, including Thomas Moss, Will Stewart, and Calvin McDowell. Moss, the owner of the People's Grocery, was known as a respectable businessman and a friend of the great civil rights activist Ida B. Wells. Despite his standing in the community, Moss was targeted due to his leadership. He was targeted and perceived to be a threat. His successful business posed to white competitors, like William Barrett, was a threat. Now let's think about this. We're often told that you need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. And this is what this community is doing. They are lifting themselves up. They are exercising their rights as citizens and being successful at it. But yet their success is a threat. We see these stories not only in Memphis, but time and time again in other cities throughout when we study our history. The three men were eventually taken by the police into custody and held in the Shelby County Jail. In the early hours of March 9th, 1892, a mob approximately of 75 masked white men surrounded the jail. They overpowered the guards and removed Moss, along with his employees, William Stewart and Calvin McDowell, from their cells. The mob took them to a secluded area near the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad Yard. And they were lynched. I'm giving you names, but I want you to think about that these men were someone's brother, son, husband, friend, leader. For what? Because their grocery store was thriving. The economic impact that would follow was paramount. After their deaths of Moss and his associates, the People's Grocery was looted by a gang of armed men and eventually sold at a fraction of its value. And guess who it was sold to? William Barrett. I think that reveals the true purpose of the violence that took place there in Memphis, eliminating a black competition to restore white economic dominance. This is not an isolated story when you study our history. And so when we talk about labor and we talk about business, we understand that there's a blueprint already that exists for our community for us to learn from. Now, what's very paramount and very important is the news of the lynching that sparked outrage across the nation was led by Ida B. Wells, the crusader of justice. She wrote a powerful editorial condemning the violence and calling for action. And she would rise to great notability in this country for her journalistic work. Wells becoming a leading voice, a leading force in the anti-lynching movement. But all this was sparked just by a Black-owned business there in Memphis. And so as we celebrate through the month and having that understanding, I want to make sure that we not only take and understand the trauma that occurred, but also the lessons that occurred in a story like the People's Grocery, and that how there are many Black businesses. And so, yes, it's great to learn the history. And I want to share 5 Black businesses that you may have heard of and may not have that will come up through the years. You have the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, founded by Charles Clinton Spalding. He was a prominent businessman in 1898. You have the Johnson Publishing Company, established in 1942. The Johnson Publishing Company became the largest Black-owned publishing company in the nation. You have the Poro College. In 1918, Annie Malone, the world's first Black female millionaire, founded Poro College. It served as a cosmetology school, business office, operation facility, and a civic functions gathering center for Black women. And then you have TLC Beatrice International. Beatrice Foods was established in 1894 under the name Haskell and Bosworth, but would go on to be a provider of grocery products. It was sold to Reginald Lewis in 1987, and Reginald Lewis was also a graduate of Harvard Law School that would go on to grow the business into the first African-American built billion-dollar company. And then you have C.R. Patterson and Sons Company. After escaping slavery in 1861, I repeat, after escaping slavery in 1861, if you know your history, we understand that 1861 is a very critical year for this country. Charles Richard Patterson would go on to organize one of the most successful carriage building firms in 1893. The firm assembled 28 types of horse-drawn carriages and employed roughly 10 to 15 people. So not only creating business, but also creating job opportunities for others. These are brilliant examples of our history that deserve merit to be emphasized, to be known about. And so we must do our work, to be due diligence, to be about standing on business, standing on the business of understanding our history and elevating Black businesses. And so if you are a Black business owner and would like the opportunity to share your story with me here with Got Time with Christopher John, I encourage you to send me an email at gottimewithcj@gmail.com. That is GOTTIMEWITHCJ@gmail.com. I thank you for taking the time here with me here today. This is Got Time with Christopher John. Know thy history.